Hi there. Some people will almost do anything to avoid a fight or a conflict. They'll change the subject, they'll leave the room, agree to things they don't actually feel good about, anything to make this tension stop. Then there are others who just can't stop picking fights. They just go on and on and on. They need to talk things through immediately. They need to find resolutions and solutions right now. They push for engagement, push for results, put for resolutions for the other person to just deal with the issue right now. And when these two people end up in a relationship together, what happens? What do you think happens? You get one of the most frustrating, painful, and common dynamics in human connection. And that is called the pursuer distancer cycle. The pursuer distancer cycle. And one person is here saying, we need to talk about this, we need to talk about this. And the other person is saying effectively that, oh gosh, can we please talk about it later? Can we leave it alone? Walking away. And the more one pushes, the more the other person withdraws. And the more one withdraws, the more the other person pushes. And this is effectively a loop, like we discussed in our first two episodes, a system, effectively. And it's really exhausting for everyone who is involved in this system. We're going to talk more about this in greater detail in this episode. I'm Rahul Nair from the Huddle Institute of Psychology, Philosophy, and Spirituality. And this is episode 3 of season 3. Today we are breaking down as to why some people fight too much and why others fight too little, and what actually happens when you tell them to meet somewhere in the middle, which rarely works. We'll look into the reasons as to why it rarely works. So let's set up the problem first. Let me start with a question, as we always do. What was conflict like in the home you grew up in? Go back, think about it. What was conflict like? I mean, there was conflict. I'm sure there were conflicts in your home. Everybody has seen conflicts of some shape or the other, or of some intensity, small ones, big ones, between parents and siblings or cousins or whatever. What was the conflict like in the home that you grew up in? Was it loud and explosive, or did people shout and slam doors, or was it, silent and tense? Issues kind of swept under the carpet, under the rug, conversations avoided, feelings remaining unexpressed. Or maybe it was unpredictable, sometimes explosive, sometimes silent, and you never quite knew which version of the conflict you're going to get the next time around. The way you, there's a reason why I'm asking you this question. The way you experienced conflict as a child profoundly shapes how you approach it as a grown up, as an adult. Not because you're doomed to repeat the past, but because your nervous system learned what was safe and what was considered dangerous. If conflict in your home meant emotional or physical harm, screaming matches, violence of some type, relationships shattering. Your brain learned effectively that conflict destroys connection, right? That's what you picked up. That's the meaning that you got from what you witnessed. The safest strategy then was avoidance. If conflict in your home meant cold silence, withdrawal, or being ignored completely, basically people shutting down instead of working things through, talking things through, your brain basically learned that avoidance destroys connection, and therefore the best and safest strategy is to pursue resolution. So you see how the patterns were developing from childhood. In one instance, you learned that better to avoid and withdraw. In the other instance, you learned that better to pursue and engage. Neither response is wrong, obviously. Both are adaptive. You developed those strategies that kept you safe in the system that you are in at that moment in your life. But here's where it kind of begins to get complicated. Your strategy doesn't exist in isolation, it only shows up in relationship with somebody else's strategy. I alluded to this in our first two episodes, right? And when a conflict avoider meets a conflict seeker, effectively the system creates a dynamic that feels kind of impossible and really, really difficult to escape. The avoider withdraws. The avoider withdraws to manage overwhelm and protect the relationship from harm. Whereas the seeker pursues. The seeker pursues to prevent disconnection and resolve the issue before it festers. Both are actually trying to preserve the connection. That's the irony. The irony is both individuals and both styles are actually trying to do the right thing, which is to build and to preserve and build the relationship and the connection. But their strategies are incompatible. And when they interact, they create a self reinforcing feedback loop that makes both individuals, both people feel unheard, unseen, and alone. So, while their intentions are noble, both end up lonely and frustrated, effectively. This is what we are unpacking today. The psychology of conflict avoidance and conflict seeking, the pursuer withdrawer or the pursuer distancer dynamic they create together, and why just meeting in the middle doesn't actually solve the problem. Because the problem is not how much you fight, it's the pattern you're caught in. It's not how much you fight, it's actually about the patterns that you are caught within. It's like a web, spider's web, where you both are stuck. Let's figure out some psychology. Let's start by understanding the psychology of each position, beginning with the conflict avoider. The conflict avoiders basically, they aren't passive to begin with. If you think conflict avoiders are passive, they are not. They are actively working to keep the peace. For them, conflict feels genuinely dangerous. It's dangerous to get into a fight. Physiologically, not just emotionally. They feel it is physiologically dangerous, emotionally dangerous, and that's why they're seeking to avoid it. Their nervous system registers tension as some sort of a threat. Their heart rate, goes up, cortisol spikes, the body goes into shutdown mode. So this often develops from one of three childhood experiences, early childhood experiences. And I really want you to focus and pay attention to what I'm just going to share. First, explosive conflict. They witnessed or experienced rage, screaming, or violence of some sort. Conflict meant harm. The lesson learned was avoid it at all costs. That's the first experience. Second experience, relational rupture. By that I mean as children, they saw relationships end, coming to an end over disagreements. Parents divorced after fights, friendships shattered or broken. Lessons learned were conflicts destroy connections. And third possible experience is emotional unavailability. Expressing needs or disagreements led to being ignored, dismissed, or maybe even punished. So you're not allowed to, as a child, to express your needs or your emotions or your feelings or any disagreements that you might have had. Because if you did, it led to you being ignored as a child, dismissed as a child, or even punished for these things. Then the lessons learned was that conflict, it's just not safe to make noise. It's not safe to make any waves, so to speak. For avoiders, withdrawing is not about not caring. It isn't about not caring. Genuinely, it isn't about not caring. It's about self protection and it is about relationship protection. They're trying to protect. They genuinely believe that engaging will make things much worse. So, why bother? Psychologically, avoidance serves many, many functions. Let me give you a few examples. For example, psychologically, avoidance serves as a way to reduce anxiety. So, not engaging means not feeling the distress that would be inherent in a conflict, right? Second benefit of avoidance is you perhaps prevent escalation. So they believe that their silence stops the situation from spiraling out of control. Another function may be self preservation. In other words, avoiding protects them from feeling overwhelmed or out of control. But here's the cost. There are some real costs too. Avoidance often creates the very outcome that they are trying to prevent, unfortunately. By withdrawing, they inadvertently signal to the other person that they don't care, which damages the connection, which is not what they want. So it kind of boomerangs. So that's the avoidance, the conflict avoider position. Let's look at now the conflict seeker. Where are they coming from? So conflict seekers, they are not like born aggressive, necessarily violent people, though they can be, but not necessarily. They are actively working to again maintain the connection. For them, unresolved tension feels genuinely dangerous. Leaving something unresolved is dangerous for them. Not the conflict itself, but the silence is dangerous for them. The not knowing is dangerous for them. If FOMO, for example, fear of missing out, the emotional distance that they may experience is scary for them, right? And it creates problems psychologically for them. So the emotional distance that avoidance creates, all of these things are genuinely dangerous for them. This often develops because of, like we explored with avoidance people, here too, there are certain early childhood experiences that would have driven them to develop these psychological viewpoints. For example, this often develops from one of the following three childhood experiences. One, conflict avoidance modeled. So they witnessed issues in their early childhood that were swept under the rug, under the carpet. They saw resentment building. They saw relationships breaking down or decaying in silence. So for them, the lesson learned was that avoidance destroys intimacy. So why do avoidance, right? It breaks intimacy. Another possible experience is anxious attachment. So, for example, they experienced inconsistent availability from primary caregivers, such as parents. They learned to pursue, protest, and demand attention to maintain connection with their parents or with their siblings, for example. Silence feels like abandonment for them. So, why would you stay silent? Why would you avoid? You should pursue, you should make a noise if you want to get things done or if you want attention, love, care, etc. Third possible experience is conflict as connection. In some families, arguing is how you stay engaged with each other. Passionate debates, even fights, were signs of caring. They were signs that people cared about something. So silence means you've given up, you don't care anymore, right? So if you've had any of these kinds of experiences, you're likely to become a conflict seeker when you grow up. For seekers, pursuing isn't about winning or controlling necessarily. Although it might seem like it might look like it, but it's not necessarily the case all the time. It's about needing to know what? Needing to know what? Needing to know, are we okay? Are we okay in this relationship? Do you still care? Can we work this through? These are the questions that the conflict seeker is pondering, right? And psychologically, again, in the same pattern as we discussed the avoidance people, conflict seeking has got several functions, psychologically speaking. Again, anxiety reduction. Addressing the issue feels safer than leaving it unresolved. So you don't have to be anxious about anything if you actually deal with it head on. Secondly, preventing disconnection. So they believe that talking prevents emotional distance. So talk, let's talk. It's better than staying silent and not talking. Relationship maintenance. Engaging is how they repair and stay close. But again, there is a cost. Pursuing often creates the very thing that they are trying to prevent. By pushing and pushing and being pushy for engagement, they inadvertently overwhelm the other person, which creates more distance, not connection. So, this dynamic maps closely to something called attachment theory. Let me talk about this a little bit. Conflict avoiders often have avoidant attachment patterns. What I mean by that is their strategy for managing relational anxiety is deactivation, minimizing needs, creating distance, self soothing, everything in isolation. That's called a avoidant attachment pattern. So, conflict avoiders often have avoidant attachment patterns, which involves a relational anxiety that is deactivating themselves by minimizing their needs, creating distance, and self soothing in isolation. Whereas, on the other hand, if you look at conflict seekers, they often have anxious attachment patterns. Not avoidant attachment patterns, anxious attachment patterns. Their strategy for managing relational anxiety is not deactivation, but hyperactivation. In other words, amplifying their needs, seeking proximity, and protesting disconnection. And when anxious meets avoidant, these are the two attachment patterns. When anxious attachment pattern of the conflict seeker and the avoidant attachment pattern of conflict avoiders, when they come together, what happens? You get the pursuer distancer dynamic. Each person's strategy basically triggering the other's core fear, creating a feedback loop that feels almost next to impossible to escape. Now, let's look at this through the systems thinking lens, because this is where it becomes clear as to why individual change is so difficult, so hard. So let's look at the pursuer distancer dynamic as a system. This isn't about two people with different preferences. It's about a relational system with a self reinforcing structure, so to speak. Right? So here's how the loop actually works. Excuse me. Step one, the seeker notices tension or an unresolved issue, their anxiety spikes, they pursue. They want to talk, to resolve, and to reconnect. Step 2, the avoider feels the pursuit as pressure or criticism. Their nervous system floods. They withdraw. They need space, time to think, relief from this intensity. Step 3, the seeker interprets the withdrawal as abandonment or dismissal. Their anxiety intensifies. They continue to pursue harder. Why won't you talk to me? Is their question. Do you even care about this? That's the question. Step 4, the avoider feels the escalated pursuit is an attack. They shut down further, stonewalling, leaving, going silent. Step 5, the cycle repeats and it intensifies. This is circular causality in action. Neither person is causing the other's behavior. Both are responding to kind of real time stimuli. But the system has created a pattern where each response triggers the next. The seeker isn't pursuing because they're needy or controlling necessarily. They are pursuing because the avoider is withdrawing. The avoider isn't withdrawing because they are cold or uncaring. They are withdrawing because the seeker is pursuing. Both at same time. That's the problem. So, why the system stays stable? You'd think normally that a pattern this painful would collapse, right? But systems are remarkably stable even when they are dysfunctional. I alluded to this before. Why? Let me talk about that in a little bit more depth here. 1. Complementary roles. What I mean by that is each person's behavior confirms the other person's worldview. So the seeker thinks, see, they always withdraw when things get hard. The avoider thinks, see, they always make things such a big deal. The pattern validates their fears. So, complementary roles. 2. Homeostasis. I referred to this in our previous episodes. The system resists change. If the seeker pulls back, the avoider might unconsciously escalate. They may escalate the avoidance to maintain the familiar distance. If the avoider instead changes her pattern and starts to engage or engage more, the seeker might unconsciously escalate pursuit to maintain familiarity of or the familiar intensity as they were experiencing before. So that familiarity is what keeps it in a stable situation. Even when one of the other person or individual is trying to make some change, the other person might still escalate unconsciously. because only that way can they maintain their familiar state of affairs. 3. Both people are adapting. Neither person is doing this on purpose. It's important to understand that neither person is doing this. Most likely they are not doing this on purpose. There are, of course, instances and cases where people are deliberately creating problems, but in most cases it's not done on purpose. They are both responding to their nervous systems, their histories, their genuine needs. That's what they are responding to. The system is bigger than their intentions. It's important to keep in mind that the system is much bigger than their individual intentions. So, what is the problem with meeting in the middle, which is usually thrown in as a solution? So, here's the adaptive people, here's the advice, that most people get. Just compromise, no? Just compromise, meet in the middle. The avoider should engage a bit more, the seeker should back off a little bit. Why not? Sounds very reasonable, but it doesn't work. Why? Why does that strategy not work? Because meeting in the middle assumes the problem is the amount of conflict, isn't it? Meeting in the middle is to, essentially to reduce conflict. So you're talking about the amount of conflict. It's not. The problem is not the amount of conflict. The problem is the inherent pattern. That's the problem. And unless you address that, the problem ain't going away by reducing the amount of conflict. If the avoider forces themselves to engage before they are regulated, they'll be flooded and they'll be defensive again. The conversation will be terrible. Terrible. The seeker will feel like engagement is just performative. It's not genuine. That's what will happen. If the seeker, on the other hand, forces themselves to back off before their anxiety is addressed, they'll feel dismissed and anxious. The silence will feel like abandonment. The avoider will feel like the peace is kind of fragile and temporary. It's not genuine. Again, you can't solve a system problem. This is the point I'm trying to make. You can't solve a system problem with an individual behavior tweak. If our relationship is a relational system, you can't solve whatever we are facing by tweaking my behavior a little bit, tweaking your behavior a little bit. No, you have to shift the structure. That's what is required. That is where I come to the point about leverage points in the system. This is important for us to understand. So, where can you intervene? Where are the high leverage points that we can tweak and address the problem with? Leverage point 1, naming the pattern. I mentioned this in our previous episode. The moment both people see the cycle, oh, we're in the pursuer distancer loop again, the system shifts. That's when the shift happens. You move from being inside the pattern to observing it. That creates choice for both of you. Leverage point 2, regulating before engaging. The avoider's withdrawal isn't the problem. Unregulated withdrawal is the problem. If the avoider can say, I need, say, 20 minutes, I need 20 minutes to calm down. Please let me have 20 minutes to calm down and I'll come back to this. That is a much better thing to do than the disappearing indefinitely thing that we tend to do. As far as the seeker is concerned, the seeker's pursuit isn't the problem, anxious pursuit is the problem. If the seeker can say, oh, I need reassurance that we will actually talk about this, even if it is not right now. Even if it is not right now, but I need to know that we'll talk about this at some point. That addresses the underlying need without overwhelming the avoider. That is regulating before engaging. Leverage point 3, breaking the assumption. The seeker assumes something. The seeker assumes the avoider's withdrawal means they don't care, right? The avoider assumes the seeker's pursuit means they are being attacked. If the seeker can hold the possibility that withdrawal is about overwhelm, not indifference, they can respond differently, right? If the avoider can hold for a moment the possibility that pursuit is about anxiety, not control, then they too can respond differently. This doesn't fix the pattern instantly, but it kind of breaks and interrupts the automatic escalation. So let me, as we did in the last couple of episodes, jump into some quick real world examples. Relationship. Let's begin with romantic relationship. The emotional processing mismatch case. So here we have Sarah, who is a conflict seeker by nature. That's her dominant style. When she and her partner Tom fight, she kind of needs to process things immediately. She has the need to process things immediately. She wants to understand what happened, how they both feel, and how to repair all of that immediately. Tom, on the other hand, Tom is conflict avoider. So when they fight, he needs to kind of take a back seat. He needs to retreat. He goes for a run, watches TV, does anything to kind of decompress before he can think clearly. Sarah interprets Tom's retreat as not caring about the relationship. So she pursues again and again. We need to talk about this right now, says Sarah. Tom feels attacked and shuts down even more. The pattern is Sarah's anxiety about disconnection drives her pursuit, and Tom's overwhelm drives withdrawal, and the cycle reinforces itself. That's an example of this pursuer distancer cycle in play. Let's take another parent child example, the discipline conversation that happens in so many homes. Anaya wants to talk to her 14-year-old son about, his screen time, the amount of time he spends on his phone, tablets, and laptop, etc. She's anxious about his development, and so she brings up the topic again and again repeatedly. Her son shuts down. He goes to his room, puts on earbuds or headphones, gives one word answers back to his mom. He is avoiding what feels like criticism about his behavior. Anaya interprets his shutdown as plain, cold disrespect. Simple. She pursues harder, more questions, more consequences, and he withdraws even further. The pattern? Her pursuit increases his shutdown increases her pursuit. Another, workplace. This has happened in so many workplaces. The feedback mismatch. Here is a case where Dave gives his colleague constructive feedback after a presentation. He thinks he is being helpful in doing so. His colleague, Emma, goes silent. She goes quiet. She doesn't respond to his follow up emails. She avoids him in the next couple of meetings. Dave starts to feel dismissed and frustrated. He brings it up again. Um, Emma feels criticized and retreats further. So, what's the pattern here? Dave needs Dave's need for resolution drives pursuit. Emma's overwhelm drives avoidance. That's yet another example of the pursuer distancer cycle in action. All right, so how do you actually shift this dynamic? Ultimately, what do you do about it? That's the question that you have on your mind. For conflict avoiders, let me address the question for each of the types. For conflict avoiders, here are the points to note. Point number one, recognize that withdrawal has a cost. Remember that. Withdrawal has a cost. You're not protecting the relationship by avoiding. If you believe that, it's not happening. You're not protecting the relationship by avoidance. You're protecting yourself from overwhelm. But the other person sees and experiences your withdrawal as abandonment or indifference. Point number two, communicate your need for space. So instead of just disappearing, say, I need time to process this. Can we revisit this issue in an hour, tomorrow, after a week, after I've had a walk, whatever? This isn't avoidance. It's regulated engagement, right? You're committing to return, which addresses the seeker's core fear. That's what is required. That helps, that will help. So communicate your need for space. Number three, notice what you're actually afraid of. Are you afraid of being overwhelmed? Or are you afraid of saying the wrong things? Are you afraid of being attacked? Name the fear to yourself. Often, recognizing it will reduce its power over you. Right? Number 4, practice engaging in low stakes moments. So don't wait for high conflict situations, high stake conflicts to practice staying present. Start with small tensions and build your capacity gradually, because you can't do this shape shift, almost system shifting overnight. Build that capability gradually. Now let's come to conflict seekers. If you are a conflict seeker, here are a few points that might help you. Recognize again that pursuit too has a cost. You're not preserving the relationship by being pushy, by pushing for engagement. You're managing your own anxiety. Important to recognize that. But the other person experiences your pursuit as pressure, as attack. Number 2, name what you actually need. Again, instead of we need to talk about this right now, try saying something like, I'm feeling a little anxious about this because it remains unresolved and it's an unresolved issue. I need to know that we will address this at some point, even if it is not immediately. That is a better option. And you can also ask for a time to settle this matter. This addresses your need for reassurance without overwhelming the other person. That might be helpful. Number 3, notice what you're actually afraid of. What's the anxiety about? Are you afraid of being abandoned or not mattering? Are you afraid of the relationship falling apart in silence? Name the fear, recognize that it's anxiety, not necessarily reality. And number 4, practice self soothing. By that I mean your anxiety is valid, but the other person can't always be the one who regulates it for you. Let me repeat that. Your anxiety is valid, but the other person can't always be the person to regulate it for you. Find ways to calm your system, calm your nervous system that uh, does not require immediate engagement with the other person. Right? So, those are 4 tactics that a conflict seeker can deploy. As far as both are concerned, if you take both individuals together as a system, name the pattern when you see it. So, something like, I think we are in the pursuer distancer dynamic again. I'm feeling anxious, stroke overwhelmed, and I notice you are withdrawing, stroke pursuing. Can we kind of take a pause and reset? Right? So, saying that is more helpful than resorting to automatic responses. This moves you from acting out of the pattern to actually observing the pattern. Point number 2 is agree on time frames. This is important. Avoiders commit to a specific time when you'll re-engage, like I need 30 minutes and then I'll come back. Seekers trust that commitment, don't pursue during the agreed space. Let the avoider regulate first. Number three, work on your own regulation, each one of you. And this is very important. Avoiders, build your capacity to stay present with discomfort. Therapy, mindfulness, or some kind of somatic work can help with this regard. Seekers, on the other hand, build your capacity to tolerate uncertainty, right? The relationship won't fall apart if the issue is not resolved immediately. Number four, repair after the cycle. After you've been in the pattern, come back. Come back and acknowledge it. I see that I withdrew and that probably felt dismissive. Or you can say, I see that I kind of pushed too hard and that probably felt overwhelming for you. Um, when you say these things, this creates system learning. You understand? You're not just repeating the pattern, you're noticing the pattern and adjusting and letting the other person know. And you're acknowledging it. So, that is very, very important as far as repair work is concerned. Repair after the cycle. Number five, consider the deeper question. Often, the pursuer distance dynamic is really about attachment security, right? Seekers are asking, are you still here? Do I matter? While avoiders are asking, am I safe? Will you hurt me? Right? These are the fundamental underlying questions under the hood. If you can address those deeper questions directly through reassurances, through creating safety, through building secure attachments, building repair routines. So if you can address those deeper questions directly, the surface pattern will often soften and help you enjoy your relationship to a greater degree. So let's wind this episode up very, very quickly. So here are a few things that I really want you to take away from this episode. Conflict avoidance is not about not caring. Conflict seeking isn't about controlling either. Both are adaptive strategies. They're not defective, they are adaptive strategies that made sense in the systems that you grew up in. Point number one. Number two, when these two strategies meet, they create a self reinforcing feedback loop. The more one pursues, the more the other withdraws. The more one other withdraws, the more the other pursues. And you can't solve this by meeting in the middle. You solve it by understanding the pattern, naming it, and intervening at the high leverage points that we talked about, such as regulated engagement, clear communication about needs, and addressing the deeper and more fundamental attachment questions that are present beneath the surface. This is what expands your capacity for healthier conflict. Recognizing that you're not fighting each other, You're both caught in a system dynamic that's bigger than either of you, right? So, in the next episode, we are going to be looking at the communication patterns. Communication patterns that predict relationship failure with terrifying accuracy. The four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. I know, sounds very ominous, but here they are: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. These are the four horsemen of relationship apocalypse, and why they are so damn hard to stop once they start. So, coming back to today's episode, if you recognize yourself in the pursuer distancer dynamic and cycle, drop a comment below, share your experiences. Have you been a seeker so far? Have you been an avoider? And what helps you? What has helped you to break away from the cycle so far? Drop all of this in the comments below. It will be useful for all of us to learn from each other's experiences. So, once again, thank you for watching this episode. Until next time, keep flourishing, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.